Good afternoon. It's Saturday. I'm getting out late, but it's like 70. It feels really nice. And it was sunny, but now it's kind of overcast and there's some wind, but the trees, which are now cloaked in dashes and splashes of green, are all around me, protecting me from the wind. I am in a good mood because we have a former president by the name of Trump, who has been impeached twice and has now been indicted once, who has never gotten a majority of Americans to support him, and of the two presidential races he ran, he lost one. Now, in most human endeavors, that's not a great record, is it? Although we have had candidates who run, but no one with the negative resume like this guy. So I was pleased to be on with Ari yesterday and to talk a little history and what the significance of it is. And if you didn't hear, I basically said that I think the implication is that the restoration of our republic. Because when the law matters again, then we have a system that is not based on the law of the fang. It's based on reason. It's based on reasonableness. It's based on written laws that we have notice of, that we obey or suffer with sanctions, civil, criminal, confinement, things like that. And a prime character who is facing this is Donald Trump. And he's not handling it very well. Poor boy. He's such a great victim. In a sense, he's not credible, of course, but he enjoys being a victim and getting angry at people and so forth. And this is an affliction of anybody who thinks of himself as an autocrat, a dictator, a despot, and that's certainly Trump. Now, we have some people wringing their hands about how can this case go forward? Is this difficult? Now, in my book, somebody who's messing around with a $130,000 corrupt deal, that's big enough to pay attention to. And it's probably greater than the property crimes that are normally prosecuted in Manhattan. On the average, I don't know what the median is. They probably have those numbers. And yes, it's a white-collar crime, which is treated somewhat differently. So everybody says, how are we going to connect him to it? Now, those of us who've been involved in corruption cases, and I don't think all the commentators either have been or are prepared to admit how you do this. Think about how a politician gets bribed. How does that happen? Well, he has to conceal it in some way, right? Now, you can give him cash. There's a guy, Bill Jefferson, years ago. He had cold cash. He kept the cash in a freezer. But that's not the only way he was paid. Jefferson was also... people would write down services, consultancy, representation, retainers, all the ways you can imagine. So for anybody who's actually been involved in corruption prosecutions, one of the key things to observe is how you conceal the money. And in this case, you have two stages. You have Cohen concealing the money that he passes on for Stormy and Stormy D, and we have Trump then reimbursing him using phony names for it. And there's I didn't think of this until now. This is my old math coming back. I remember people were upset with the new math. Well, one of the principles of the new math is transitivity. So if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. So if A is giving to B money and B is giving a benefit to C, A equals C, meaning our Cohen is representing Trump. And any of you people out there who are teaching math or studying it, don't bother your child with this, because it's a concept that doesn't improve your understanding of math, I don't think, although it's a good logic puzzle. So that was the basic operation. So then the next question is, are we only going to have the documents? Well, no. We're going to have Michael Cohen, We're going to have Pecker, unfortunate name. We have the two gals, Stormy D and McDougal. And we may have, voluntarily or involuntarily, Weisselberg, who was the CFO. If I remember correctly, Cohen said that he was involved in the loop. Now, how do you do that? Now, assume that there's a single defendant in this case, that is Trump. How do we get all this other evidence in? If they're part of a conspiracy, we can get them in. We name them as unindicted co-conspirators. Now, why would you do that? Why can't you just tell the story? Well, you do that because the laws of evidence allow you to get in statements of conspirators in furtherance of the conspiracy, the scheme here to defraud. So you have all these witnesses in there, and once you establish that they're all connected to this illegal agreement, then you're in business. All their statements are admissible against Trump, whether or not he's present when they make statements. Isn't that a glorious tool for a prosecutor? But not so for the defendants. So we have a simple explanation for how and why we have these records with these phony statements. And then we have witnesses, and more than Cohen, who can elaborate upon the scheme. And so then finally, what do we think of Trump's defiance? Now, there's a lot of defiance among defendants. This is not new. But among the more recent cases that everybody knows, we had Leroy Nicky Barnes, who was the black retailer of mob drugs to the community, and that is Harlem mostly. And he was considered untouchable. And Bob Fisk actually prosecuted him with a lot of people. And he was defiant. His picture was on the front of the New York Times Magazine with his arms crossed, and, you're not going to get me. He didn't say that, but that was plainly the message. He was defiant. So defiant example number one. He was convicted. He went to prison. He agreed to cooperate, something I thought was wrong. I thought he shouldn't be allowed to diminish his time in prison for anything. But that's what happened. And I had some association with that case because I had prosecuted a guy named Matthew Madonna, who was in the Genovese crime family. And Matty Madonna was something. He became the wholesale supplier of heroin for Nicky Barnes. Now, this was considered dramatic because the quote Italians, that's the way it was looked at, shouldn't be dealing with outsiders. And some in the organized crime syndicates didn't want to touch the white powder. And to the extent they did, they thought it would be okay if it was kept in the, quote, black community. It gives you some idea. But, okay, so that's Leroy Nicky Barnes. Now, remember, we had the Gambino crime family, and we had people in that as well who were defiant. Now, so there's a string of people defiant who still stood trial and were convicted. And Gotti is probably one of the standouts. And he was in the Gambino crime family. And when he was convicted, the crime family was diminished greatly, although it still exists in Brooklyn and other places, but I know Brooklyn. So, where does Trump fit in all of this? Trump acts like a mobster, thinks like a mobster, doesn't have the cojones of a mobster. He wouldn't go in prison like Madonna did, sit there for 20 years and come out and become a leader in the crime family. So he's not that type. And those who don't come out that way, they find their way into a pine box. So on Tuesday, we can expect Trump to try to look for ways to be defiant and independent and how this doesn't matter to him. But the more he does that and the anger that he shows, the more we know we finally got to him. And as kids, we have fist fights, and we see prize fighters. And there's nothing like realizing your fragility when, having never been hit or scratched or bled or felt a punch, because then all of a sudden you do, and it changes everything. Now, supposedly Trump was with a bunch of friends for dinner he was going to have on the night he learned that he was indicted, and people report he was surprised. How could he possibly be surprised? And I think there's only one way, assuming it's true, and that is that he told somebody he was surprised. And the only way it's true is he was so certain he had intimidated everybody to back down, the way he has with politicians. He forgot he was in New York. Bragg is a street kid as well as a lawyer. And there was a lot of pressure on Bragg to fold. But there was also pressure for him to see if he could find anything legitimately after declining to prosecute the case that Vance and Pomerantz and others put together. So, what do we have? We have the beginning of a story that I really do think is turning us back toward a republic, because the law has already mattered. People are celebrating the fact that this guy got kicked in the ever large hindquarters and has to come to New York and has to hope there's a demonstration, and if there is, it's large enough that it looks like he's got some of that old machismo going for him. But the truth is, he's like most bullies, the kind of guy that folds. Now, you know, Gotti's not that type, and Leroy Nicky Barnes wasn't that type, and they were as stoic as could be. But this is a guy who's dodged the bullet, metaphorically speaking, most of his life, and anything that mattered to him, and now it's come a cropper. And when there's blood in the water, you can count on others saying, oh, I can go in now, it's safer. And so I would hope we see something from Georgia. I hope that Garland hasn't made Jack Smith just a cover story for continuing to do nothing and kicking the ball down the road until he can say, forgive the mixed metaphors, by the way, until he can say, oh no, there's a campaign going on. We can't appear to be political. Well, bullshit. This is like the center of our national identity and purpose, that we are a government of laws and of the Constitution. And we don't have, if we know about it, fraudulent representatives. So Trump may not be hiding anything in his icebox to keep it chilled, but he's committed enough crimes that anyone who thinks $130,000 in payoffs involving affairs, fraud, and to affect a presidential election, if they don't think those are enough important elements to prosecute someone, they're not telling us the truth. They accuse the government of being fascist for prosecuting Trump. They're the fascists, because they would sound us out and threaten the judge and threaten the prosecutors because they've got nothing else. So that's my conversation today. There are other things going on, but I can't expect you to listen to me so much on such a beautiful day. So I say goodbye to you in my cathedral of trees, probably until tomorrow. Bye-bye.